Okay, so today we're going to dive right in to some pretty interesting stuff happening over in South Africa right now.
Yeah.
There's all this tension brewing between the ANC and the DA.
Right.
And it seems to all stem from this recent vote on the fiscal framework.
Yeah.
I guess the DA voted against it.
He did.
And so, yeah, we're going to try to unpack that for our listeners.
Yeah. For this deep dive, you've pulled together some really interesting stuff, excerpts from an interview with Willie Aucamp. He's the DA spokesperson, right?
Yeah, from the Daily Maverick.
Yeah, from the Daily Maverick. And also a summary of a podcast that discussed this whole thing.
Exactly.
So we really want to sort of wade through all of the political noise and figure out, what are the real core issues that are causing all this friction?
Right.
And, where do these parties stand publicly? And, what does all this mean for South Africa? How are they going to govern? And what does this mean for the economy?
Yeah. I think what's really interesting is, on one hand, you have the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile. He's criticizing the DA's stance pretty heavily.
Mm-hmm.
But then on the other hand, you have Aucamp saying, the DA is open to talks.
Right.
So it's like this, contradiction on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to try to figure out what's going on beneath that.
Right, definitely. And I think, to start off, it's important to point out that there is at least one thing they seem to agree on, in principle.
Oh, yeah.
Both Mashatile, according to the podcast summary you gave me, and then Aucamp in the Daily Maverick piece, they both say that any decisions made now should prioritize South Africa as a whole. The country, not just their individual parties.
Right. Put the country first, not the party.
Exactly. And Aucamp actually says, let me see if I can find the exact quote here. Every decision we make must be in the interest of each South African. That interest is for the country, not for political parties.
All right. So that's the foundation. It sounds good. Everyone wants what's best for South Africa. But how does that actually play out when it comes to the budget and policy decisions?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Do they actually follow through with their actions?
Mm-hmm.
And where do their ideas of, what's best for the country start to differ?
Exactly. So listeners, that's something to keep in mind as we go through all of this.
Yeah.
So where should we go from there?
Well, let's talk about, the statuses of negotiations.
Okay.
Because we heard reports a while back that things were pretty bad between the ANC and the DA.
Yeah.
But then there was talk about, restarting discussions.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's the latest on that?
Okay, so as of Aucamp's interview with the Daily Maverick, formal talks hadn't actually restarted yet.
Oh, okay.
He said, quote, "No, they have not yet." And he mentioned that the DA's Federal Executive Council, which is their top decision-making body.
FedEx?
Yeah. FedEx, they were meeting that evening.
Oh, okay. And he said they would have clearer instructions after that meeting.
Okay, so they were still, waiting for that internal DA discussion to happen.
Yeah.
But he did say something really important. He said, quote, "We never close the door on negotiations.
Right.
We are willing to speak to the ANC to get a workable, proper budget on the table."
Yeah, so they're signaling that they're ready to re-engage, even with all these disagreements.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what he said about how the fiscal framework was passed, that sets out the broad spending targets and all that.
Yeah.
He pointed out that the ANC actually went to parties that are outside the GNU to get the votes they needed.
Wow. Okay, so the GNU, for anyone who doesn't know, that's the Government of National Unity, so that's the coalition.
Yeah. Okay,
so the ANC basically went around the coalition.
It seems that way.
To pass this framework.
Yeah, and that could definitely be seen as, a sign that they weren't exactly prioritizing the coalition in that moment.
Yeah, maybe even a little bit of a snub to the DA.
Potentially.
But, Aucamp is still optimistic.
Yeah.
He says, let me find the quote here. "We believe anything can be fixed."
Oh, wow. So he's still hopeful.
Yeah.
Even with all this going on, I think it's also really interesting to consider what the business community has said about all this.
Oh, right. Yeah, they've been pretty vocal.
They have, apparently, they reached out to the ANC, the DA, and the IFP.
Okay.
Those are the main parties in the GNU, right?
Right.
And they urged them to basically stay the course.
Yeah, stick together, work it out.
Yeah, stay in the room, hold the line, keep building compromise. That's a direct quote.
Wow. Yeah, they're really trying to keep this coalition from falling apart.
They are, and I think it's because they understand how important stability is for business.
Yeah.
What was the DA's response then?
Well, Aucamp said they weren't surprised by it.
Okay.
Especially because, remember when the DA first joined the GNU? The markets reacted really positively.
Oh, right.
He even said, When the DA joined the GNU, we immediately saw investor confidence grow. Markets reacted positively.
Right. So they know that stability is good for business
Exactly.
and that if this coalition breaks down, it could have some real negative consequences.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of the budget concerns now, particularly the VAT increase.
Oh, yeah, that's been a big point of contention.
It has. We saw that leaked letter from the DA, remember, where
Yeah.
they said that, quote, the issue that currently confronts the GNU is not whether a 0.5% increase in VAT is implemented.
Yeah, but then they also took legal action to try to stop that increase.
Right, so it seems like a contradiction.
It does. How do we make sense of that?
Well, if you listen closely to Ocam's explanation, it sounds like they're not just focused on blocking the VAT increase itself.
Okay.
What they really want is for the budget to include clear measures for economic growth and job creation.
Hmm.
Their argument is that the current budget proposal is kind of vague. Like, it mentions some areas for reform, but it doesn't really get into the specifics of how they're going to achieve those goals.
Right, so it's not just about the VAT increase, it's about the bigger picture of economic growth.
Exactly.
So the legal action is like a tactic
It seems that way.
to pressure the government to address these broader concerns.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
And Ocamp claims that they've actually put forward a document with a bunch of specific proposals.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like, quote, numerous measures to stimulate growth immediately.
So they've got their own plan.
Yeah, and he says they've included specific implementation steps, they've identified where spending cuts can be made and which reforms can be implemented right away.
So they're not just complaining, they're actually offering solutions.
Exactly, and he really emphasizes this by saying, quote, we're not only talking in broad strokes, we're talking specifics.
Wow. So they're calling out the government for being too vague,
Right.
and they're saying, look, we've got a detailed plan here.
Exactly.
So it sounds like the DA is using the VAT increase as leverage to get the government to take their economic growth strategy seriously.
Yeah, they want more than just broad ideas. They want to see concrete action.
Exactly.
So this brings us to another interesting point. You know, there's this perception that the DA is struggling to balance being a part of the government with also being an opposition party.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like they're in the GNU, but they're also criticizing it.
Right.
How do they respond to that?
Well, Ocamp pushes back on that pretty hard.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he says that being part of the government actually makes their responsibility for oversight even greater.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he says, quote, members of parliament have an oversight responsibility. We act in the best interests of the country. That responsibility became an even bigger responsibility as we have our own members in the executive branch of government, and we must keep them to account, too.
Right, so they're saying they have to hold everyone accountable, even their own members.
Exactly, and he even kind of takes a dig at the ANC. Yeah, he suggests that because they were the majority party for so long, they maybe weren't as good at overseeing their own actions.
Yeah, that's a pretty bold statement.
It is, and of course the presidency has a different view.
Okay, what do they say?
Well, they've reportedly said that it seems contradictory for the DA to oppose the fiscal framework
Right.
while also being part of the government.
Yeah, that does seem kind of inconsistent.
But then Ocamp clarifies that the fiscal framework is just one part of the whole budget.
Okay.
He points out that other bills, like the Division of Revenue bill and the Appropriation bill, still have to go through the process.
Right.
And he says, quote, the budget has not been voted on the fiscal framework, has been voted on the other bills, must still go through the Division of Revenue and Appropriation bills.
Okay, so there are still more opportunities for negotiation and debate
Exactly.
and for the DA to exert its influence.
Yeah, and he ends by saying, quote, the fact of the matter is that our MPs will always keep doing oversight over the executive.
Okay, so to sum it all up, it's a really complicated situation.
Yeah, it is.
On the surface, everyone says they're committed to doing what's best for South Africa.
Right.
But beneath that, there's all this tension and disagreement.
Especially about the budget.
Yeah, and the DA's role in the government.
And, you know, the business community is really pushing for everyone to stay united.
Right, because they know that stability is crucial for the economy.
Right.
So it's clear that the DA is prioritizing very specific, growth-oriented measures in the budget.
Yeah, they want to see concrete plans, not just vague ideas.
Exactly. And they're also fiercely defending their right to hold the government accountable.
Even if it means criticizing their own members.
Precisely.
So for our listeners out there, I want to leave you with this question.
Okay.
Given this whole balancing act between coalition governance and the need for accountability, what do you think are the essential ingredients for a truly effective and accountable government?
That's a great question.
Yeah, and how important do you think public scrutiny is in all of this?
Yeah. How do we keep everyone honest?
Exactly. It's a complex picture, and it's definitely going to keep evolving.
It is.
But thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been really fascinating,
There has been.
and we'll keep following this story as it develops.